picture this scenario. You're standing at a high-stakes networking event, or maybe you're sitting in a coffee shop across from someone you really want to impress.
Oh, the pressure is on.
Right. And you've done the work. I mean, you've memorized an entire dictionary's worth of English vocabulary. You have flashcards stacked to the ceiling back home, and you've aced every written grammar test ever put in front of you.
You are prepared on paper.
Exactly, on paper. But the moment you open your mouth to actually contribute to the conversation, you just freeze. Or the words come out, but they don't sound like the witty, intelligent person you actually are. They sound, I don't know, clinical.
Yeah, you sound like a highly advanced AI just reading a textbook aloud.
It's the worst feeling. So today we are taking a deep dive into exactly that problem. We're looking at a fascinating C1 to C2 Advanced English Masterclass hosted by two instructors, Emma and Daniel.
And their whole approach is just so refreshing because it tackles what I call the linguistic uncanny valley.
The uncanny valley. I like that.
Yeah, it's where you're technically correct, your grammar is flawless, but the human element is completely missing. It's an incredibly frustrating plateau for language learners.
It really is. And the mission of this deep dive is to explore how their 40-minute session bridges that terrifying gap between academic memorization and real-world living fluency. They aren't just throwing a list of arbitrary definitions at you. They're breaking down the mechanics of how highly proficient speakers actually behave out there in the wild.
And the core philosophy they employ here is just crucial. They are addressing the fundamental reality that knowing a word's dictionary definition is, well, practically useless if you don't understand its social utility.
Right, like knowing the chemical composition of paint doesn't make you an artist.
That is a perfect way to put it. You have to know how the paint behaves on the canvas. So what Emma and Daniel are doing is shifting the focus from passive vocabulary, the words you just recognize on a page, to active language.
The phrases you reflexively reach for to navigate a messy, complex social situation. Which means, for you listening right now, the pressure is totally off.
Put down the notebook.
Seriously, do not try to frantically memorize every term we discuss today. I just want you to listen to the overall architecture of these conversations. We're going to look at how words behave in a sentence, the hidden conversational patterns they create, and most importantly, why native speakers choose them over simpler alternatives.
Let's start with the concept of complexity because, textbook language really thrives on simplicity. Hello, I'm fine, the weather is good.
Very black and white.
Right. But human reality is almost exclusively gray. Navigating advanced English means having the linguistic tools to describe friction and unexpected complications. And Emma and Daniel highlight a beautiful phrase for this, which is, it's not as straightforward as it seems.
I find that phrase so fascinating because it does so much heavy lifting in a conversation. You can just say, this is surprisingly difficult, or this is complicated.
You could, but it's not as straightforward as it seems. Accomplishes something entirely different socially. It manages expectations by validating the original assumption.
Okay, let's break down the psychology of that.
So if you say, finding a good apartment in this city is surprisingly difficult, you're just stating a fact about your own struggle, right?
Yeah, it's just about you.
Exactly. But if you say, finding a good apartment isn't as straightforward as it seems, you're inviting your conversational partner into a shared realization. You're acknowledging that on the surface, looking at online listings feels easy. You just sign a lease, right?
Right, but then reality hits. You have hidden agency fees, neighborhoods that look great in the photos, but are actually situated next to a noisy train track.
Oh, or landlords who want like 6 months of rent up front.
Yes. Wait, I shouldn't just agree. Let me build on that. The phrase acts as a warning label. It signals to the listener that the surface-level simplicity is a total trap.
Exactly. You're preparing them for a story of hidden friction. And the source material pairs this perfectly with another phrase for shatter assumptions, which is, it turns out that.
It turns out that is, it's the ultimate linguistic pivot. It's the phrase we use to manage newly discovered truths.
Emma and Daniel use this great example of dreading a bill at a fancy restaurant. You sit down, the ambiance is totally intimidating, and you just brace yourself for financial ruin.
We've all been there.
Right. But when the check arrives, you say, I thought this place was going to drain my bank account, but it turns out that the prices are quite reasonable.
It shows a real-time update of your worldview.
Yeah.
You're showing your work, mathematically speaking. You're saying, here is my hypothesis, here's the new data I received, and here's my updated conclusion.
Yeah, and it's incredibly useful in a work environment too. Daniel actually uses a great workplace example where a team believes they're facing this massive technological failure, but as he says, it turns out that the technical problem was actually just a communication issue.
Using that phrase demonstrates such a sophisticated level of self-awareness. It shows you're capable of admitting your initial perception was wrong, but without sounding incompetent.
Precisely. Which naturally leads us into how we handle disagreements and differing perspectives. Because if reality is constantly shifting and our assumptions are constantly being shattered, we're inevitably going to clash with other people's perceptions.
Right, which brings us to the phrase, as far as I'm concerned.
This is how a highly proficient speaker establishes a firm personal boundary. If you say, as far as I'm concerned, quality is more important than speed, you aren't claiming this is a universal law of physics.
No, you're stating that within your personal operating system, this rule is absolute and unmovable. I can see how that is deeply polite, but intensely rigid. It's like a velvet rope.
A velvet rope, I like that.
Yeah, you aren't attacking the other person's desire for speed. You're just saying, in my territory, we prioritize quality. But let's look at the other side of that coin. What if you do want to flex? What if you want to agree with someone, but only partially?
The lesson provides these softer degrees of agreement. Phrases like, to some extent, by and large, and for the most part. These are essential buffering tools.
Like when you're reviewing a colleague's work.
Exactly. Emma and Daniel use the example, the presentation was excellent for the most part, although the conclusion could have been stronger.
I look at a phrase like, to some extent, as a volume knob rather than a light switch. You aren't just turning agreement on or off, you're dialing it to a precise frequency.
That's a great analogy.
Let me challenge the necessity of this for a second. Why do we need this level of linguistic padding? I think a lot of learners might look at to some extent and think, why not just say, I partly agree. It's shorter, it's a direct translation from my native language, and it gets the job done.
Well, the direct translation might transmit the raw data of your opinion, but language isn't just a data transfer mechanism, it's a social lubricant.
The social lubricant, right.
If you're in a meeting and someone pitches a massive reorganization plan, and you bluntly say, I partly agree, it sounds clinical. It sounds like you're filling out a multiple choice survey. And depending on your tone, it can even sound slightly combative.
It totally puts the other person on the defensive. They immediately wonder, wait, which part don't you agree with? Are we fighting now?
Precisely. But when you say, I agree with your proposal to some extent, the rhythm of the sentence changes. It sounds thoughtful, like you're actively weighing their words on a scale in your mind. It softens the impending critique and saves space for both parties.
You're demonstrating cultural fluency. You're signaling that you understand the unspoken rules of professional politeness in English.
Exactly. It's the packaging around the message that dictates whether the message is actually received.
Okay, so once we understand how to navigate these nuanced gray areas of agreement and expectation, we have to look at the actual vocabulary we use to describe them. It's time to upgrade the toolbox.
We need precise instruments to describe these complex situations without sounding like we swallowed a Victorian dictionary.
Yes. This is where C2 vocabulary comes into play. It's all about intense precision. The lesson starts with words that project conviction and truth, and they really unpack the word compelling.
I feel like compelling is used constantly, but a lot of people mistake it as just a fancy synonym for interesting.
Oh, absolutely. But the source material makes it clear that compelling implies a physical or psychological force. If something is interesting, you might look at it for a moment. If something is compelling, it demands your attention. It traps you.
It has a gravitational pull.
Right.
An interesting documentary is one you put on in the background while folding laundry. A compelling documentary is one where you sit on the edge of the couch with a pile of unfolded laundry next to you, and you suddenly realize it's 3:00 a.m.
You cannot look away. It forces a reaction. Now, from conviction, the lesson moves to how we evaluate truth. And this is where they draw a brilliant microscopic distinction between plausible and credible. I will freely admit, for a long time, I use these two words completely interchangeably.
Oh, most people do, even native speakers. But when you're operating at the highest level of proficiency, the distinction is vital. Plausible applies to the logic of a scenario. It means an explanation is believable or possible based on the laws of reality, but it hasn't necessarily been proven yet.
So if the office server crashes and the IT department says it was a power surge, that is a plausible explanation. the logic holds up.
Exactly, but credible is about the trustworthiness of the source. It's usually applied to a person or an institution. Think of a courtroom. You don't have a plausible witness, you have a credible witness.
Because the jury trusts the person, their background, their demeanor, their lack of bias.
Right, and because the witness is credible, the story they tell is deemed plausible.
That is a phenomenal breakdown. Plausible is the message, credible is the messenger. Using these words accurately signals to your listener exactly how much weight they should give to the information. Are we trusting the logic or are we trusting the person?
It's such a fine line, but so important. And then the masterclass shifts from truth to scale and certainty, bringing up the words substantial and negligible.
Two beautifully contrasting words. Substantial implies physical or metaphorical weight, a substantial amount of money, substantial progress on a construction site.
And on the far other end of the universe is negligible. I honestly just love the literal feeling of saying that word, negligible.
It feels tiny just saying it.
It describes something so infinitesimally small that it can be completely ignored without altering the outcome. A negligible difference in the price of 2 paper towel brands. A negligible delay in a flight time.
They follow this with the weight of the word inevitable, meaning an unavoidable outcome. And then they highlight the extreme danger of the word ambiguous.
Oh yeah. Ambiguous means something is fundamentally unclear because it's open to multiple interpretations. The lesson points out how dangerous an ambiguous sentence can be in a legal contract.
An ambiguous contract is essentially a playground for corporate lawyers.
Because if a clause can mean 2 different things, it means nothing at all until a judge decides.
Let me push back on this entire vocabulary list for a second, though. We're throwing around words like negligible, plausible, and ambiguous. Is there a risk of over-indexing on this C2 vocabulary? Like, if I'm at a backyard barbecue holding a hot dog, and I turn to my friend and say, the amount of mustard left in this bottle is negligible, do I just sound insufferably pretentious?
You absolutely do.
Right.
You really do. And that touches on the true pinnacle of language mastery, which is the art of blending. If you speak exclusively in heavy Latin-based C2 vocabulary, you sound like a walking thesaurus. It alienates people because it feels performative rather than communicative.
It creates distance between you and the listener.
The secret, which Emma and Daniel's entire approach implies, is knowing how to blend high-level vocabulary into everyday syntax to maintain approachability. You don't use negligible to describe mustard at a barbecue.
No, save it for the mustard factory.
But you would use it at a coffee shop while casually complaining to a friend about how your 2% annual raise had a negligible impact on your standard of living due to inflation.
Fluency is context. It's knowing when to deploy the heavy machinery and when to leave it in the garage.
Context is everything. Which brings us to an environment where precision is mercilessly judged and where the heavy machinery is almost always required, the professional workplace.
Professional English is essentially a diplomatic mask we all put on at 9:00 a.m.
It really is. Workplace English is a highly evolved language of action, momentum, and above all else, risk mitigation. The lesson breaks down expressions revolving around momentum first. Things like to meet a deadline or to run behind schedule.
And my personal favorite, to get something underway. It just means to start an initiative, but it sounds so much more dynamic. Let's get this project underway. You can almost hear the gears turning and the engine starting.
It creates a real sense of forward motion. But the true art of corporate diplomacy reveals itself in how we handle conflict. Emma and Daniel explore a fascinating linguistic shift. Why we say, address an issue instead of deal with a problem.
Right. If you look at those two phrases in a vacuum, deal with a problem, is perfectly valid, grammatically correct English. Why is it culturally frowned upon in a boardroom?
Because deal with a problem carries immense emotional baggage. It implies frustration. It conjures imagery of rolling up your sleeves, sweating, and preparing for a physical fight. If a manager walks in and says, we need to deal with the HR problem, everyone in the room tenses up, blood pressure rises.
Oh, totally. But address an issue is completely sterile. It acts as an emotional anesthetic.
Exactly. It removes the panic. It frames the challenge not as a crisis to be fought, but as an intellectual puzzle to be solved objectively. You're putting the issue on a table, stepping back, and shining a light on it. It's safe.
It's all about liability and ego protection. We see the exact same mechanic with the phrase raise a concern. The source material analyzes this as the ultimate diplomatic shield.
Imagine you're in a meeting and the department head proposes a new timeline that you know will destroy your team's weekend. If you say, I don't like this proposed schedule, it's terrible, you've just launched a direct personal attack on the department head's judgment. You've backed them into a corner, and their only option is to fight their way out.
You've brought a sledgehammer to a delicate surgery.
But if you say, I'd like to raise a concern about the proposed schedule, you completely alter the geometry of the conflict.
I always think of this like using a scalpel. You achieve the exact same goal. You're halting the terrible schedule, but you leave the relationship perfectly intact. By raising a concern, you're externalizing the negative emotion. You aren't saying you hate the idea, you're just politely taking this abstract object called a concern and placing it in the middle of the table for everyone to look at together.
It's linguistic sleight of hand. You're distancing yourself from the friction. And the lesson continues this theme of emotional distance into decision-making vocabulary. Look at the phrase, take something into account. You aren't just remembering that shipping costs have gone up. You are actively taking them into account, which sounds rigorous, mathematical, and professional.
Or using the phrase, from a practical standpoint, as a sophisticated weapon of disagreement. If a creative director pitches a wildly expensive, impossible idea, you don't say, that is completely unrealistic and stupid. You say, from a practical standpoint, this proposal might present some logistical challenges.
Which is a beautiful, coded way of saying, your idea is incredibly creative, but unfortunately, we live in a reality where gravity, budgets, and mathematics exist.
It validates their creativity while shutting down the execution. The ultimate corporate kill switch.
It really is. And finally, in the business realm, the lesson highlights come to a conclusion, and a word that I think is the absolute lifeblood of business English. Viable.
Viable means capable of working successfully, a financially viable alternative, a commercially viable product.
It's not just possible. Floating a car into space is possible, but it isn't a commercially viable transportation method. Viable means it's structured for survival in the real world.
But all of these corporate shields and sterile phrases, they have an expiration date. I mean, you don't take your briefcase to the pub. When the workday ends and we interact with friends, family, and our social circles, the linguistic goal flips entirely.
We stop mitigating risk and start trying to build genuine connections. How does advanced English function when the goal is empathy?
That's where the lesson unpacks what might be the most essential phrase in the social English toolkit. I see where you're coming from.
To be clear, for anyone listening who might take this literally, this has absolutely nothing to do with physical geography.
Right, you're not saying, I see you just walked here from the subway station.
No, it's entirely about internal perspective. It means you understand the sequence of thoughts and emotions that led someone to their current opinion, even if you fundamentally disagree with that opinion. Emma and Daniel use a great example of a friend who is terrified to move abroad. You might personally think moving abroad is a thrilling adventure, but you say, I see where you're coming from, but I think it's worth the risk.
You're essentially telling them, I have temporarily moved my brain into your body. I am looking at the landscape through your eyes, and I recognize the fear you're feeling.
It is verbal empathy. You're validating their reality. It pairs closely with phrases like, that makes sense, or the slightly elevated, that makes perfect sense, and I can see the logic behind that. These phrases are the connective tissue of active listening. They prevent the other person from feeling like they're talking to a brick wall.
And then there's the phrase for hesitant agreement. I'm inclined to agree.
This is a masterful piece of conversational engineering. It means you're leaning heavily toward their perspective, but you haven't fully committed yet. You're leaving the door cracked open. It's an invitation for the other person to keep talking, to keep convincing you.
I have to pause and play devil's advocate here, though. We're praising the empathy of these phrases, but I have been on the receiving end of, I see where you're coming from, and it did not feel empathetic.
Oh, I know what you mean.
It felt like a polite, passive-aggressive way of saying, you are completely, hopelessly wrong, but society requires me to wait until you finish speaking before I tell you why.
That is a brilliant observation, and it cuts to the core of what makes C1 and C2 English so complex. You're talking about the mechanics of prosody, the tone, the pitch, the musicality of how we speak. Advanced English isn't just the words printed on the page, it's the melody you use to deliver them. You're absolutely right that I see where you're coming from can be weaponized.
If someone says it really fast, with a flat, clipped tone, and immediately follows it with a loud B-U-T, it's a weapon.
Exactly. It becomes a dismissal. But if you slow down the pacing, drop the pitch of your voice slightly, and leave a brief pause before introducing your counter-argument, it acts as a genuine bridge. The text is identical, but the tone dictates the meaning. A highly proficient speaker manipulates tone to build conversational bridges rather than walls.
The lesson also explores how we express our own internal psychological shifts. They highlight the microscopic difference between two phrases that describe changing your mind. I've had a change of heart, and I've had second thoughts.
This is a distinction that natively proficient speakers make on pure instinct, usually without even realizing it. I've had a change of heart describes a complete, fundamental, and finalized reversal of your feelings or your decision. Imagine you were going to sell your childhood home. You sign the initial papers, but you wake up in the middle of the night and realize you simply cannot do it. You call the realtor and say, "I've had a change of heart."
The decision is made. You cross the bridge, walk to the other side, and burn the bridge behind you. There's no going back.
But "I've had second thoughts" describes a completely different state of mind. It emphasizes lingering doubt. You were offered a new job in a different city. You said yes initially, but now you're looking at the housing prices, you're thinking about your current friends, and you're feeling a deep sense of uncertainty.
You're standing squarely in the middle of the bridge, looking back and forth between the two shores. You haven't made a final choice to cancel the move, but the original confidence is gone. You're experiencing active doubt.
It's remarkable how much psychological nuance is packed into those two tiny idioms.
And speaking of idioms, this is where the terrain gets truly treacherous. If you take the most advanced conversational English and run it through a literal translation matrix, it sounds utterly absurd.
It really does.
The visual imagery makes absolutely no logical sense unless you understand the cultural context. We're entering the minefield of idioms and phrasal verbs.
Idioms are arguably the final boss of language acquisition. They're deeply embedded in the culture, highly visual, and completely rely on shared situational knowledge. Emma and Daniel detail a few of these visual workhorses. Let's look at go the extra mile.
Meaning to exert additional effort far beyond what is required. A hotel receptionist doesn't just give you a map to a restaurant. They personally call the chef, who is their cousin, and get you a VIP table. They went the extra mile.
Or on the same page, which is ubiquitous in business. It implies shared understanding, typically before a major action is taken. Let's review the budget one more time to ensure we are all on the same page.
It creates an image of a choir all reading from the same sheet music. And then we have get the ball rolling, meaning to overcome inertia and start a process. But the imagery gets incredibly chaotic when we talk about stress. The lesson highlights to be snowed under,
which means to be completely overwhelmed with work. But think about the visceral image it invokes. An avalanche has occurred. You're buried beneath a suffocating weight of tasks, immobilized and unable to dig yourself out.
And the sister phrase to that is to have a lot on your plate. This means you have many demanding responsibilities or problems simultaneously. If someone asks you to organize the office holiday party, you might say, "I'd love to, but I really have a lot on my plate right now." I just love the mental chaos of combining these.
It's a lot.
Imagine a native speaker saying, "I need to get the ball rolling on this project, but I am completely snowed under and I already have a lot on my plate." It's a linguistic circus. You are buried in an avalanche, holding a massive plate of food, trying to kick a ball.
It is completely surreal if you stop to analyze the imagery, yet native speakers string these metaphors together back to back without a second thought. The source material also touches on how we use idioms to softly de-escalate tension and call out bad behavior without causing a fight. For instance, make a mountain out of a molehill.
This means exaggerating a minor inconvenience into a massive crisis. A molehill is a tiny bunk of dirt in the grass.
Oh.
So if a coworker is screaming and threatening to quit because the office ran out of their favorite brand of coffee creamer, they're making a mountain out of a molehill.
Using the idiom gently mocks the scale of their reaction, hopefully bringing them back to reality without directly insulting them. We also have read between the lines, meaning to deduce the hidden, unspoken truth behind someone's polite words. If you read between the lines of the CEO's email, the company is preparing for layoffs.
But beyond these vivid idioms, Emma and Daniel dedicate a massive portion of this masterclass to a phenomenon that completely derails advanced learners. I call it the phrasal verb gap.
The phrasal verb gap is fascinating. You meet learners who can read academic papers, who know hundreds of formal, multi-syllable Latin-based verbs, but who cannot follow a casual 5-minute chat at a pub. Why does that happen?
It is deeply tied to the history of the English language.
Yes, exactly. After the Norman conquest of 1066, English developed a dual-tier vocabulary. The French-speaking ruling class brought in Latinate formal words, while the common people continued speaking Germanic, Anglo-Saxon root words. Over centuries, this created a system where we have formal, single-word verbs for official use and casual, multi-word phrasal verbs for everyday life.
So instead of saying, I must calculate the solution, which sounds like a mathematician in the 1800s, a native speaker today will say, I need to figure out the answer. Emma and Daniel highlight figure out as the ultimate phrasal verb for understanding or solving a problem.
They also point out how we use bring something up instead of introduce a topic. We use carry on instead of continue. We use cut back on instead of reduce. I need to cut back on my sugar intake sounds so much more natural than I must reduce my sugar consumption.
But I want to dig into the psychology of why we still do this. Why do native speakers naturally gravitate to a phrasal verb like put off instead of just saying postpone? From an efficiency standpoint, postpone is one single word, put off is two. Why use two words when one will do?
It is all about the sonic rhythm and the social atmosphere those words create. Phrasal verbs are constructed from short, punchy Germanic root words and prepositions put, get, take, off, on, up. They give casual English a bouncy, staccato, rhythmic flow. Postpone sounds heavy, official, and rigid. It sounds like a court order.
Right. Nobody wants to be postponed.
Exactly. Put off sounds light, flexible, and friendly. When you use phrasal verbs, you're signaling to the other person, we are equals, we are relaxed, this is an informal space.
That makes so much sense. It's a sonic cue for intimacy. The lesson gives special attention to the phrasal verb come across because it operates on two entirely different tracks.
Yes. On a literal track, it means to find or encounter something by accident. I was cleaning the attic and I came across my grandfather's old watch.
But on the social track, it describes the impression a person projects to the world. He comes across as incredibly arrogant in meetings, but he's actually very shy. I use this constantly when dissecting social interactions. How did my presentation come across? You're asking for a mirror to be held up to your behavior.
As we move into the final stages of true C2 mastery, the focus shifts to these microscopic nuances. We're entering the final polish. This is where even individuals who have studied for a decade can stumble. We're looking at easily confused words and the intricate dance of softening highly controversial opinions.
Emma and Daniel call out a series of micro-distinctions, often involving false friends that trick speakers of Romance languages. Let's start with the economic sphere. Economic versus economical.
Economic is a macro word. It relates to the broad systems of finance, trade, and national wealth. The country is facing severe economic challenges, or the government implemented a new economic policy.
But economical is a micro word. It means efficient, thrifty, and not wasteful, specifically regarding money or resources. Buying a hybrid car is a very economical choice. It saves you money at the gas pump.
Next, we have a distinction that trips up almost everyone. Sensible versus sensitive.
This one is brutal for Spanish and French speakers because the translations cross over. In English, sensible has nothing to do with emotion. It means practical, logical, and reasonable. Wearing thick boots in a blizzard is a sensible decision. It demonstrates good judgment.
Whereas sensitive relates directly to emotional or physical reactivity. He is very sensitive to criticism and cries easily. Or, on a physical level, my skin is highly sensitive to the sun.
Then we look at the passage of time. Historic versus historical.
Historic assigns massive importance. It describes an event that fundamentally changed the trajectory of the world. The signing of the peace treaty was a historic moment.
But historical is completely neutral. It simply means relating to the past. This library contains historical tax documents. The tax documents aren't going to change the world. They're just old.
Now, perhaps the most vital distinction for the workplace, effective versus efficient.
Oh, I have sat in boardrooms where executives use these interchangeably, and it causes massive strategic confusion. Let's lock this down. Effective means successful in producing a desired result. You aimed at a target, and you hit it. The goal was achieved.
But efficient evaluates the cost of hitting that target. It means achieving the result with the absolute minimum waste of time, energy, friction, or resources.
I always use a transportation analogy to explain the mechanics of this. Imagine your goal is to travel 3 blocks down the street to the grocery store to buy a carton of milk. If you choose to drive a military tank to the grocery store, that is an effective method of transportation. You will undeniably arrive at the store. Traffic will not stop you. The goal is achieved.
But it is catastrophically inefficient.
Exactly. It burns 50 gallons of jet fuel, tears up the asphalt, and takes 45 minutes to parallel park. Now, what if you drive $1 million Ferrari? Also effective, slightly faster, but still inefficient because of the astronomical cost of the vehicle compared to the goal of buying milk. But if you ride a bicycle, you arrive at the store, you burn zero gas, you park instantly, and it costs nothing. The bicycle is both highly effective and highly efficient.
The modern corporate world constantly demands that systems be both. If your marketing campaign brings in $1 million in sales, it's effective. But if you spent $2 million on advertising to get those sales, it's profoundly inefficient, and your company will go bankrupt.
To close out this masterclass, Emma and Daniel transition from vocabulary back to social dynamics. They explore the ultimate test of fluency, how to soften strong opinions and inject complexity into a black and white narrative.
If you're at a dinner party and someone drops a sweeping, aggressive statement onto the table, for example, social media is completely evil and is single-handedly destroying society, you face a choice. If you disagree, you could just shout, "You are wrong." But that destroys the atmosphere. Emma and Daniel provide gentle, sophisticated counters like, "I'm not sure I would go that far," or "I'm not entirely convinced."
What I love about those phrases is the humility built into them. Notice how the hesitation is centered entirely on you, the speaker. You aren't saying your logic is flawed. You're saying, my mind is struggling to make the leap to your conclusion. You're taking ownership of the doubt, which instantly diffuses the tension. The other person doesn't feel attacked. They feel like they just need to explain it better.
And if you want to add nuance to a simplistic rumor, let's say the office gossip is that a rival company went out of business purely because the CEO was lazy. You happen to know there were supply chain issues and changing tax laws. You can step in and say, there's more to it than that.
It's an elegant pivot. It signals that you possess deeper, more layered knowledge without sounding arrogant. It opens the floor for a more intelligent discussion. They also introduce the phrase, "It's worth bearing in mind that."
This is a highly polished, intellectual way to reintroduce forgotten or ignored facts into an argument. It's worth bearing in mind that their international sales were actually up last quarter. It doesn't invalidate the previous point. It just adds a necessary counterweight to the scale.
And the final pivot phrase they highlight is, "Having said that," you use this to introduce a direct contrast to your own point. "This apartment is ridiculously expensive and small. Having said that, it is directly across the street from the subway station." It demonstrates the ability to hold two opposing, contradictory truths in your mind simultaneously.
Which is the very definition of intellectual and linguistic fluency. You're acknowledging the gray area we started with. You're holding complexity with grace.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today. We have mapped out the intricate terrain of advanced English. We started in the gray areas of shattered assumptions, moved through the sterile diplomacy of the corporate boardroom, explored the empathy engine of social validation, decoded the chaotic imagery of idioms and phrasal verbs, and finally polished the microscopic differences between C2 vocabulary. But as Emma and Daniel point out in the closing moments of their lesson, staring at a highly detailed map is not the same thing as putting on your boots and walking the territory.
The final lesson here is a call to action. Listening to a deep dive like this is passive absorption. If you turn off this audio and do nothing else, these phrases will fade. You must transition from passive recognition to active, deliberate usage.
So how do you actually do that? You don't try to memorize all this today.
You curate. You become an editor of your own vocabulary. Look back over the expressions we discussed. Pick 3 or 4 that genuinely resonate with your personality. If you're a highly empathetic person, maybe you focus on, "I see where you're coming from." If you're navigating a tricky corporate job, maybe you focus on raising a concern instead of attacking an idea. Take those few phrases and build real personal sentences. Don't just memorize the textbook example of, "I've had second thoughts about the job offer." Apply it to your actual messy, complicated life. Say out loud to yourself in the car, "I've had second thoughts about moving to the suburbs," or "I've had second thoughts about confronting my landlord."
You have to breathe your own life into the language. Because as this source material so brilliantly proves, advanced English is not about finding the longest, most obscure 20-letter words to assert your intellectual dominance. It is about precision. It's about emotional nuance. It's about sounding natural, approachable, and human in the unpredictable gray areas of life.
If we pull back the lens one final time to look at the grand scheme of human communication, understanding English at this elite C1 to C2 level is not just about cracking a new linguistic code. It's a study in human psychology.
Exactly. I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. I want you to think about your native language, whatever language you grew up speaking in your home. How often do you rely on your